So hello to everybody who's coming in, who's already here, and who's going to be joining us today. And I want to say deep bows to all of you who have taken the time to be with us today. So I am Wendy Morrell, and I am currently the president of the Sacred Dance Guild. And I'm calling in from Ottawa, Canada. And I know people are calling in from different places, so that's an exciting thing for all of us. I'd like to start today, before we move into our program and do what we're going to do, I want to all just together take a moment of silence and just take a moment with deep breath. So you can even close your eyes if you want, put your hand on your heart, just so that we can collectively be on the planet at this time. With the global health pandemic where many have died, particularly our elders, and the global racism pandemic where people have died for centuries, if we can just breathe together and remember we are one people on one planet in the one dance of life. Thank you all. So, welcome to the Sacred Dance Guild's first in a series of interviews with honorary members. We kind of consider these our living legacies, although they themselves may not look at it that way, but I like that idea. They're our living legacies, and we're going to ask them 5 important questions. So these questions were created by the team working on the Sacred Dance Guild's Legacy Project. We figured after 62 years of experience as an organization, that it was time that we could create this a process to actually accredit Sacred Dance Facilitators. That's a small word. There's a lot behind that, and I'm not going to get into that today, but we will be getting into that over the next few months. And there's a number of aspects to this particular project. And one of them is to discover what we think of as those gems that are the people who've been doing the work for many, many years, and that they can share with us, people here in the present, and that we are able to document for people into the future. These are important words from our past and our present that we want to make sure are continued as we move into this future. So we've come up with that thought burst, these 5 important questions, and this interview series. So originally we were going to do these just as one-on-one interviews, us interviewing someone, interviewing the person, recording them, and then looking through those recordings for those jewels that we know, that one sentence, those words that just like, oh, that's the one, those aha moments. But then we thought, well, if we can do that and we have this great technology, why not just open that up to others to sit in and be part of that experience? So here you are, and here we are today, ready to do just that. So I am very delighted today to have David Taylor to be our first in the series. So David, like a lot of us, are sort of technically saying, oh my goodness, we're moving into this no world. So I appreciate, David, that you've jumped into the technology and are willing to dance with us down this sort of lane that we're going to go. So David was one of the 6 individuals in 2018 that the Sacred Dance Guild identified as an honorary member, representing the 6 decades that we have been in existence. And that included 5 others who we will be hearing from as we go through the next few months. But that joins a group of honorary members: Ted Shawn, Ruth St. Dennis, Jess Meeker, Forrest Kogan, Jean Erdman, all of those who have passed on, but very important people who were part of the genesis of the Sacred Dance Guild, particularly in the United States. And Carla De Sola, who's still with us here today, thank goodness. Love to Carla. I'm not sure if she's with us today, but she's here on the planet, so that's a great thing. We believe that all of these individuals are gifts to the world of sacred dance and are so grateful for the work that they do, and that continues to inspire us and others. So before we continue with the interview and get some technical tips, just all of us techies here trying to figure this out, I know we're using this technology that's new to a lot of people in the dance community who are used to being out there in person, in the flesh. So I'm grateful that we've dived in and danced forward and able to do this. I want to introduce Dawn Harris. So Dawn is I don't know where she's sitting on your screen, but she's next to me on my screen. So Dawn will be managing the chat. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little chat button. So if you have something to ask, a question to pose, a comment that you're thinking as the interview goes along, you can feel free to put that in the chat to Dawn. You can certainly put something to everyone if you so choose. The chat sits on the side. Now, of course, everybody has a different device. So I can tell you what it looks like on mine, but I have no idea what it looks like on Carolyn's or Elaine's or Marilee's or his, or so everybody might be seeing things differently. So that's kind of the world, I guess. So that's where we're at today. We all see things a little differently, but we're in this thing together. So that's kind of cool. So use the chat feature. Send things to Dawn. I just want to say at the end of our session, we will have a question and answer kind of period, hopefully, if time permits. And Dawn can pose those questions, or if you're so inclined, you can unmute yourself at that time and ask the question yourself if you're willing to do that. So that's cool. We will ask you to stay muted through the interview, just not because we don't want to hear from you, but sometimes the dog's barking or the husband saying, "Where is the peanut butter?" or whatever happens in the background. We'll let those go for now. So thank you. We'll be using what's called the spotlight feature. So I should be spotlighted right now, which means I should be in the middle and you guys should be in little boxes somewhere. If that isn't working for you, well, I don't know, call the 1-800 number, and I don't know who they are, but we'll just go with that. We have tested our sound, so David and I and Dawn all know we can hear each other. So we're just presuming you can all hear us too. Shake your head if you can. If you can't, well, that 1-800 number is probably there somewhere. You can call them and see what they'll do. Maybe the Maytag repairman will come out. So, yeah, I think that's all I got to say at the beginning. So I want to start with showing a video. Now, some of you may have seen it already because I posted it on our events page, but it's a Zicker, David's company. It's a 3-minute or so video showing the work they do. So I thought that would be a good way to do two things. One, test me technically figuring out if I can actually access the video. And number two, give us a chance to see that before we kind of dive into the 5 important questions with David. All good with that? All right, we're going to test this share screen thingy out and see if I can actually share my screen with you. Maybe. Maybe. And it's over here. Just takes a minute to come up. Dawn, if this doesn't work, you can text or send me a message or something.
It looks like it's working.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Coming. Yeah.
It just takes a minute. This is our breathing time. Or 2 minutes, maybe. Oh,
There we go.
Perfect.
I don't hear the sound.
Oh, hang on. Thank you. Can you hear the sound now?
No. Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Heidi. Did you actually all see and hear that? Oh, good. I thought it might have been a one
Yep.
or the other. Thank you. So isn't that beautiful? That's like, I love that video, David. Thank you so much for whomever put that together. I know the credits were there at the end, but I think it's just stunning example of the work that you've done with that amazing company. And some of you will remember that in 2010, David was at the festival at Connecticut College and did a wonderful class there. And some of the work that he did with Zikr was done with our community of sacred dancers. So without any further, I'm going to now spotlight David. I won't go through his bio. I'm sure you've all read it, and perhaps some of it will come out as we go. So I'm going to ask Dawn to switch over and spotlight David. I can take my turn off.
Working on it. There we go.
There we go. Yay. Do y'all see him? Yay. Hi, David.
Hello.
Yay. So maybe at the front end, before we get into the 5 important questions that everybody is trying to figure out, what are those questions? Maybe just ask you if you can talk a little bit about your personal journey with sacred dance and how that has kind of manifested in your life.
Yes, I'd be happy to. First of all, I want to thank Wendy and Dawn for all of the work they program and episode and interview process, and especially for Wendy, who I've known now for over 10 years, and all the work she's done with the Sacred Dance Guild. And I know it's an incredible amount of work because I've run 2 companies and 2 schools over a period of 50 years, and I know how much work it is. So thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Dawn, for everything, for pulling all this together. My journey actually began in college when I was at the University of Denver. I was minoring in philosophy and Eastern religion, and I discovered the work of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. If you're not familiar with Gurdjieff, he was a philosopher, a teacher. He was a spiritual initiate. He was a choreographer. He was a composer. And he lived from about 1879 to 1949. He came from the Caucasus Mountains in what used to be the Soviet Republic of Georgia, and which is a very interesting part of the world. Of course, it is home for 2 of the world's major religions, the Russian Catholic Orthodox Church and Islam, but it's also an area with other smaller groups like the Yazidis and the Armenians and the Kurds, who have actually a mixture of Zoroastrianism and all kinds of other magical practices. He went out into the world to seek spiritual knowledge. He was very disappointed with all the books he read and the teachers he had as an early young man. And he, according to his accounts, met a number of dervishes in the Middle East, which is the Sufi equivalent of saints. And he also went deep into the mountains, and he discovered a secret monastery called the Sarmun Monastery, which, among other things, trained students or chelas in the art of sacred dance. And he learned a lot of sacred dances from different cultures and different religious backgrounds and traditions from all over the world. And he brought them back to Russia. And escaping World War I, he ended up outside of France in a place called Fontainebleau. And he set up his school there, and people came from all over the world. And these sacred movements that he learned from these hidden monasteries and from the dervishes and others that he created became one of the strongest foundations of his teaching. And he created over 250, some people say even 350. Wow. And some of his students would actually practice these movements 8 hours a day. The main purpose of them was first and foremost to develop an inner sense of attention and quiet, just like we all try to do when we meditate. But this was done with the aid of the movement, because the movements were designed with so much difficult isolation of different parts of the body that if you did not have this inner center of attention, you simply could not do them. So in a sense, the movements were actually a meditation in and of themselves. And there were many different kinds of them. There were those that were based on very religious and profound sacred themes, and others that were in his description much more psychological. But they were incredibly difficult, and there were different levels of them. There were 6 obligatory movements that all of his new students had to learn before they could move on to more complicated movements. He passed away in 1949 in Paris, and his work is still very prevalent all over the world. There are Gurdjieff groups everywhere. There's also a Gurdjieff Foundation. And as I began to read his books and his teachings, I became more and more fascinated. This was the end of my college career. And I ended up going to England to find and to get into a Gurdjieff group. I was born in England, so this was interesting, and kind of going back to where my roots were, and I had relatives over there. And I actually did discover and was admitted into a Gurdjieff group. And it was very interesting in retrospect, because this group was led by a man named Dr. Courtney Myers, who actually was Gurdjieff's personal physician in the last years of his life before he passed away. It was in that Gurdjieff group that eventually, not at the beginning, I was introduced into the movement classes, which are part of, an integral part of all the Gurdjieff movements and groups all over the world. But unfortunately, I had to get back to Denver, and so I was not able to actually start with the movement classes, and I was very disappointed. But what happened when I came back to Colorado is I got into classical ballet through my spiritual teacher. And I was in my early 20s. I started very late, and I became absolutely absorbed with ballet as a dancer first, but then later on as a teacher. And my world completely changed when my teacher gave me my first opportunity to choreograph. And what happened was that I started to just play around a little bit with movement and gestures. And I felt something I had never felt before. And I choreographed my first ballet or dance to the music of Claude Debussy's Engulfed Cathedral. And as I was creating this movement, I felt there was another force that was moving through me that was not me. And I had never experienced this before, and it was a very, very profound and moving experience. And right at that time, a movie had come out based on Gurdjieff's early life called Meetings with Remarkable Men. The year was 1979. And it was based on a book that he had written when he was younger that recounted his earlier travels, discovering and meeting these Sufi dervishes, and going into the Sarmang monastery and going into Tibet and India. And in the movie, at the very end of the film, there was 20 minutes of a large group of his students that were being led by a woman named Jean de Salzman, who was one of Gurdjieff's primary pupils, and she was given the tremendous responsibility by Gurdjieff to be one of the main persons to carry on the legacy, to maintain their integrity. So she had her own school, I believe it was in England at the time, and those students were in this film. And for the first time, I saw about a dozen of these movements, and you can see them yourself. The film is on YouTube. It's called Meetings with Remarkable Men. And if you don't want to watch the whole movie about his early life and his travels, you can go to a part of the film that is just the dance sequences. Well, I sat in the theater and I started to cry uncontrollably, because I had never seen the movements before. I had read about them for years. I was about to be admitted into the group of movement classes in England. And all of a sudden, I was looking at the movements, and they were very similar to what I was doing in my choreography. And so I just had this overwhelming feeling come over me. And I became fascinated with not only the Gurdjieff movements, but also sacred dance and ritualistic dance from around the world. Here I was involved in classical ballet, which of course is one of the most beautiful art forms in the entire world, and certainly the most difficult physical art form. And when I was doing ballet, I didn't really separate it from Gurdjieff's sacred movements or any movements, because I felt classical ballet, in a sense, was sacred because it was so beautiful. But at any rate, I became fascinated with different cultures and ancient cultural traditions and ancient sacred rituals, from the Aborigines to Balinese sacred dance to Tibetan sacred dance. And I started, as I developed as a choreographer, to weave more and more of those themes and ideas into my choreography. So that's sort of how I got started.
Wow, that's a great story, David. And you can see all of that when we watch the video of the Sacred Dance. I mean, it's so out front there. So that's, and I have seen that movie myself. I remember it a number of years ago. It's absolutely stunning. So I recommend watch the whole thing. It's just interesting how it unfolds, but the movements themselves are just, they're just so otherworldly. They take you into places that you can't even quite imagine. So thank you for that one. So I'm now ready for the first question, and it is, what are your thoughts on creating what we call sacred space? That might be indoor, outdoor, inside, outside, site specific, the whole concept of sacred space.
Well, of course, in my studies with sacred dance all over the world, and I'm sure you're all aware at the same time, there are cultures that specifically look for or create their own sacred space for their dances that are for them very profound and deep expressions of their spiritual needs, of controlling the forces outside of them, as well as working with the forces within inside of them. The Aborigines, of course, have sacred space where they do their dances. And of course, up until just recently, so many of these sacred dances with these so-called primitive cultures, and of course that's a misnomer,
Yeah.
were hidden from the view of the general public. The Aborigines, for example, have public sacred dances, quote, and they have private sacred dances. And no one was able to see from the outside those that were their private ones. In the same way with the Balinese culture, it used to be that you would never be able to see some of their sacred rituals. But of course, with tourism now and going on since 1970, and the world's changing, this is no longer the case. In about 1994, I was on a brief getaway down in Phoenix, Arizona with my wife, and I opened the newspaper, and to my shock, I saw an advertisement for an Aboriginal group from Australia performing dance and using the didgeridoo on a middle school baseball field in the suburbs of Phoenix. And I thought, no, this is no way. This could not be happening. Well, I was so curious. I went there, and it was, and there they were. And so there they were on a middle school baseball field. But what they were doing was they were completely focused and centered in their ritual. So in that sense, they created their own sacred space, or they at least changed the energy of the space where they were performing.
Yes.
And of course, there's many examples of this all over the world.
Yes.
It used to be you would never see Balinese sacred dance. The reason I bring up Bali is I became fascinated with their rituals, and I did a huge piece in honor of Balinese sacred dance.
Yeah.
But now, Balinese dancers now come to the United States. This started, I remember, in about 1989 in Boulder near Denver. There was a Balinese dance master who came and started teaching sacred Balinese dance to people at a dance festival. Well, this, again, 20, 30 years ago, all of this was unheard of.
Yeah.
So now what is happening, and it's been happening now for quite a while, I really feel is that what used to be hidden is now being revealed.
Beautiful.
And so what used to be very sacred and private and esoteric and out of the sight of the general public is no longer the case.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go to Istanbul or to someplace in Lebanon or Turkey or whatever, and you can see whirling dervishes as you eat your lunch in a restaurant. And this never was the case, So it's very, very interesting. Now, regarding sacred space, and I'll give it up, the Sufis are a very good example. This all evolved out of course, their divine master Rumi back at the end of the 13th century, and the Mevlevi sect, which Rumi was very much a part of, was the one who developed the sacred ritual of the whirling dervishes. They performed that ceremony, which is actually called the zikr, and that's where the name of my company comes from, in a building, a venue, not necessarily a temple, but a venue called a tekkie, T-E-K-K-E, that was all designed and based upon sacred geometry. So they were aware, and so are the Aborigines, so are the Anasazi Indians, so are some of the Maori warriors in Africa. They were aware that there were certain spaces, either completely natural spaces on the earth, or spaces that they could actually create with the use of sacred geometry that magnified the energy within that particular space. And not only magnified it, but complemented the dance and the ritual that they were performing.
Right.
So this has been around from the beginning of time. Today, it's a little bit more challenging, I think, to, first of all, have your own, if you're a group or a dance company like we are, have your own, quote, sacred space. It's difficult. But again, so much of it comes from our own energy. It comes from our own motivation. Everything is energy. Everything is vibration. So even though I accept and I understand and I value tremendously the idea of a sacred space that is specifically either created or used in the natural world to enhance the energy of sacred dance,
Yes.
it is not necessarily a prerequisite to have that experience of sacred dance.
Right.
We are the ones who bring that consciousness to whatever work we're doing. Being in the world of professional ballet, I've performed in theaters all over the world, and I've always viewed the stage as being a sacred space because performers send out tremendous energy from that space that washes over the entire audience, but even goes further than that. I remember reading a book about sacred music and how the author brought up the fact that when we go to, let's say, a music hall and we hear Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, for example, those are thought forms from that music. And it goes through the ethers, and sometimes, depending on the strength of that thought form, it can emanate for miles outside of the theater. So, Joe Schmo, who's a football addict who just finished his 6-pack of beer and passed out on the couch, whether he knows it or not, and if he's like 5 miles away from the concert hall, he might be, and very readily is psychically affected by those thought forms, depending on the strength of the thought form. So to be a performer, I always felt was a tremendous responsibility because you are sending out this energy, and whether people are conscious of it or not, they are being affected in their subtle psychic bodies. And the theater has all 7 divine rays in it. It has power, it has education, it has philosophy. The 4th ray, harmony through conflict. It has science. All of this light and music and sound and movement, all of that is powerful energy that we receive sometimes on a very subtle level in our psychic bodies. So we are the ones who bring that sacred experience to wherever we happen to be. To have a space that is specifically designed for that and has been cultivated by repeated use of that sacred energy, of course, is fantastic. And we all won't need to be aware of that, because you don't want to put pearls before swine. Ideally, we want to be in an atmosphere whereby, as we express our deepest and most profound energies and try to get in tune with our higher selves, we want to be in a sympathetic vibrational field around us. But we also can bring that to a space as well.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I'll have to re-listen to all of that again. I'm grateful we're recording this so I can rehear that. That's amazing. Well, I think that leads into question number 2, and part of it is sort of a segue, that these are the thoughts on creating sacred community. So we have this thing called sacred space internally, externally, and space, and now the role of creating a sacred community in groups, when participating or when you're leading, maybe in particular.
You know, when I was invited by the Sacred Dance Guild to come to Connecticut and to lead a fairly large group of people in some of the Gurdjieff movements, it was a really rewarding experience. It was a wonderful experience. When I am in the studio with 13 professional ballet dancers who are just incredible dancers, but none of them have ever heard of Gurdjieff, have no idea of what is behind those sacred movements. And Zikr always incorporates 1 or 2 of the Gurdjieff sacred movements in each one of our performances. So I tend to, with my company, I'll start there, I tend to give them a little bit of background, but I don't go into a big, long lecture and detail and what have you. First of all, as dancers, their vibrations, they are open. They're open to any kind of movement. And by virtue of their training, they are trained and geared to present and that movement perfectly with absolute exactitude. Now, the Gurdjieff movements were never designed for that. They weren't designed for professional dancers at all. They were designed for people like you and I. And even though they were very difficult, and they were, you know, you wanted to do them with as much precision as possible, that wasn't really the main point. What I found with the professional dancers through years of working with them is I gave them maybe just a little bit of a background on this, but then I just let them do the movement. And sometimes I had a Gurdjieff coach who came in, and I just let that person take over to teach them. And what I found very interestingly was that through the process of rehearsing these pieces over and over every day for weeks and weeks, and the process of performing them in front of different audiences, sometimes 8, 10 performances, I watched this transformation take place right in front of my eyes. I could tell, I could feel it, that they may not have even been aware of it themselves, but I could sense it. I could sense that something was happening because the energy and the original impetus from where that sacred movement came, that energy infused the dancers who were doing it, and they were affected by it. There was a noticeable effect. In fact, I had many of them say, I don't know what happened, but I experienced something I've never experienced before.
Wow.
So that's a testament to what Gurdjieff used to call conscious art. This came from a higher level of consciousness. And with conscious art, all of us respond in exactly the same manner, but at our own level of understanding.
Absolutely.
So I've always had this fascinating experience, and I had it in Connecticut too. Here were 40 people I've never met, I've never seen before. I had no idea what their background is. But in teaching these movements, I could viscerally feel this energy that they were bringing into themselves and through them and outward manifesting. And so in terms of the sacred community, I think this is one of the most important things, whether it's a large group or a small group. Just the process of doing that movement and trying to be centered in doing that movement is an incredibly profound and positive experience, no matter what level your understanding may be.
Right.
Now, the thing that we all have to, of course, remember is everything we're talking about has never been for the masses.
No.
It's never been designed for everyone.
Yeah.
Classical ballet is not designed for everyone. I've been teaching it for 50 years. It's the most difficult physical art form in the world. And I see, maybe one young lady out of 500 that I've taught who end up becoming professional dancers.
Yeah.
It's just not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in an age, though, as we said before, where so much of the hidden now is being revealed. And there is a yearning from more of the mass consciousness now for this type of experience. There's no question about it. Right. Like there has never been before. So the old adage of it's only for the very few, well, yes, but it's growing because there's a greater need for it. We can all feel it. We can all feel this change of consciousness, as Wendy and Dawn and I talked about before we started, that the pandemic and the racial protests and the racial consciousness is created. There's a whole change afoot. And this goes across the board with all kinds of spiritual energies. My spiritual teacher said to me, and I'll never forget, dance is the perfect metaphor for the activity of God. It is spirit descending into matter. If you think about all of the dance forms throughout the world, most of them are for what? Entertainment. Or a communal experience just for fun, like folk dance.
That's great.
Folk dance, you don't have to be a professional dancer. When I went down to see the Pueblo Indians in New Mexico and going to see a corn dance or whatever dance they happened to be doing, the entire village took part. Little children standing next to grandparents, next to fathers and mothers. And it was a part of this incredible communal experience. And for them, it was very sacred and very profound. Folk dance is primarily done what? For fun and community. It's a happy dance. All kinds of social dancing brings joy to us. But there are so many wonderful, unlimited forms and genres of dance. How lucky we are as human beings. Yeah. Look what the waltz did in the mid-19th century. The waltz transformed European middle class and upper class society at that time. To be able to actually hold a person and dance with them in rhythm and sequence and some sort of coordination. But it is such an incredible blessing. Every form of dance is such an incredible blessing. I watch with the internet now. I'm on YouTube all the time. I get to see Nureyev perform in 1961 after he just defected from the Soviet Union. I mean, 15 years ago, that was unheard of. I was watching clogging dance from Wales last night. In a film that was made in 1955. absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
It's all fascinating.
Yeah.
It's just what we bring to it, you know? And so I think this idea of sacred dance as a community, we now have a greater opportunity to expose more and more people, but it's not just that, it's reciprocal. There are more and more people looking for this,
Yes.
who are finding that there is some sort of inner need that maybe they can't describe, they can't put their finger on, but a need for more meaning than just pure entertainment. And this is what sacred dance throughout history has been all about, of course. When the Hopis on their little barren, dry, arid plazas dance with their masks on, Crow Mother or some of the other dances, they dance to the kachinas. They dance to and for and to bring the energy of the kachinas, the spiritual forces, to their plazas with rain and bounty for crops. You know, this is ritual is designed in a precise way to affect the energies of the outside world. Ritual is also designed specifically to affect the energies of our inside world. And this is why dance is such an incredible gift. It gives us the opportunity to tune in to our higher self, our God self. And it also gives us the opportunity through that to send out our energies and become light in the world.
Wow, absolutely. Yeah, it's that whole interconnectedness. And I think, as you say, people are yearning to feel that in every way. So, I mean, I think we're living in a time in history that we are so fortunate to be part of this global community where we can now, as you say, those things that were hidden are now being. I talked to a fellow, I think he was from maybe Nepal, who said they'd hidden his dances for 1,000 years, but he said, it's time for us to share with the world. We need to, and we must. And so while my grandfather might not have, I am called to do that. And so I thought that's sort of what you're saying, this whole calling that we're listening to. So that brings me to my next question, number 3, that is how the sacred manifests, maybe through your own daily practice. How does it manifest for you personally?
I'm going to be very frank and honest. When I don't dance, I get depressed. I get out of tune with myself. All kinds of energies that perhaps I don't care for are I can feel. When I dance, it is like manna from heaven. It puts me back in touch with myself. My whole mood changes. The problems of the day vanish. And this has been throughout my entire career. I say this to our young girls because it's the same. It was the same for me when I was dancing. How many days, how many hundreds of days when I was dancing did I say to myself, I'm too tired. I'm in a bad mood. I don't want to go to class today. And I would force myself to go to class and get through the class. And at the end of class, I was a new person. The problems of the day had vanished. I was more buoyant. I was happy. I was invigorated. I became more in touch with myself. And I said the same thing to my girls. Girls, I know what you're going through. I know most of the time you don't want to go to class. You've had a long day at school. You know, your teacher said something you didn't like. You know, your boyfriend said something you didn't like. You failed a test or whatever it is. You're not in the best mood. That's when you need to come to class, you know, because it brings into our energy. It is truly, truly a transcendent energy that comes into us. And this is why at the very, very, I want to say, extremes or the edge of real sacred dance, it does become a transcendent experience, or it can become a transcendent experience. So I, for one, I must have it. Now at 72, it's more and more difficult every day. All of my joints ache. You know, even when I just teach an online class here in my dining room and I can't get my leg above 45 degrees anymore, I am in pain afterwards. But you know what? It's worth every bit of that pain, because for me, it is truly a mana that I must have.
Wow. Wow. Well, I think you've answered my fourth question, Sue. It says, why do you do what you do? I don't
Well,
think you really have a choice.
this is the thing. We and I know you do, but we all need to be reminded sometimes to be thankful. I've never made any money doing this. I've gone into debt many, many, many times in profound ways with my company. So that's obviously not the reason I'm doing it, but I feel so blessed to have had the experiences I've had. There's been, maybe on one hand, maybe on two, but no more than that, experiences that I've had in my life, either choreographing or watching a performance of my dancers, that are worth my entire incarnation, that were truly magical and transcendent experiences that were worth every bit of the toil and sweat and hard work and suffering. Absolutely. And to be able to have that experience, I feel so absolutely blessed. To be able to work with dance every single day, and especially, of course, with beautifully trained ballet dancers who have these gorgeous young spirits. They're so beautiful inside and out. I mean, this is why I get up every day. I love going down there and working with these kids, because I see their beauty and their inner energy come out, which is totally their own individual energy, but it totally inspires me. I feel very, very blessed. We all need to be thankful that we've had this incredible experience of dance be part of our lives.
Wow. Yeah. And they're very blessed too, David, to have you with them sort of as a leader. I think this is, so my next question is that question. If there was one thing, or maybe more than one, that you wanted to convey to people, we're looking at creating this accreditation for sacred dance facilitators. We want more people out there sharing from a particular perspective. What would you say to people wanting maybe to go into that world, to be a facilitator in this thing, dance, and particularly in the concept of the sacred? What would you?
Well, I think, like everything in life, it's all energy, and we are all drawn to energies that we are, of course, attracting.
Yeah.
It's not like we can say, okay, I'm inviting you, the entire world, to come into my world, and let's do this, have this sacred dance experience. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work. People are led or attracted to that particular manifestation of energy. Mm-hmm. Some people who do yoga are not necessarily attracted to dance. Right. Some people who dance are not necessarily attracted to yoga or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's whatever our inner path, our energies of our inner path, we are attracted to those experiences that we need. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's anything that we can really force by our own ego or our own will, but on a more subtle, more intuitive, and more spiritual level, we can all recognize that there is a huge paradigm shift going on, that all forms of spiritual expression are now becoming more prevalent in the world, and there's a much greater need and a greater recognition of it in lay circles. I mean, we see it every day on the news or in the mass media. We see examples of spiritual expression or spiritual ideas being brought into areas just in the workplace, communal groups, all of this now, it's becoming integrated within the mass consciousness more and more and more. Wow. So I think the most important thing for us who are attuned to sacred dance is to try to be as open as we possibly can, first of all, to all forms of expression, and to be as inviting as we possibly can to bring in those new people and to share those energies in the most positive, if not maybe at the beginning, a more rudimentary level, because again, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't necessarily make them drink.
Yeah.
So as we go forward, I think I've struggled with this in my own advertising,
Yeah.
and with my own board with a professional company. Our audiences are not big. No, I mean, we have a 300-seat house, and if we get 110 people, we feel really great. So as I advertise Zikr and the performances, I've realized I have to compromise a little bit and kind of try to make it a little bit more, shall I say, audience accessible in terms of the images and the ideas we're presenting. Because the main thing is to get the bodies in the seats.
And then,
Once they're in the seat, you've got them, because they're going to be blown away, and they are blown away. And I've had this experience over and over and over again, where lay people come up and say, I never knew anything like this existed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and what I was feeling. I didn't know anything about this particular culture or this particular kind of sacred dance. If you can get them in the seats, you got them. So I think we need to be very, very open and very unthreatening and just very, very welcome, even on a very rudimentary basis. I mean, you know, for some people, Wendy, going outside with 10 people and holding hands and skipping around in a circle is like a transformative thing. I mean, you know, it really can be. And it should be, and it's a wonderful thing, you know. So at whatever level we can bring people in and expose them to, that's what we need to do. But I think what's really exciting is on the other side of the fence, there are more and more who are looking for that, who are seeking it. So I think we're at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we mentioned when we were chatting before these Sacred Sundays we're doing, that some people are coming who I know they're coming online, but they would never have gotten in their car, driven to a class, and gone in the door to that particular class. So this opportunity that was presented unexpectedly is giving us exactly that, allowing us to engage people who might not have been engaged otherwise, which I hadn't actually thought of. So I'm very grateful. So I think you're right about that. It's like, you know, you have to meet where people are, not where you want them to be. They have to start somewhere. So they have to come through the door and get in the seat or join the class or do something to be able to listen to the next story.
For about 5 years in a row, we performed every year at a Catholic church here in Denver. Now, picture this. After the church service, after Mass, we came in and we moved all of the pews and all of the books. We laid down a Marley dance floor, and hundreds of Catholics, mainly senior citizens, came in, and we did Gurdjieff sacred dances, Tibetan sacred dances, Balinese sacred dances, all kinds of esoteric stuff in a Catholic church, and they absolutely loved it.
Of course.
And that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago.
No.
So we have some great opportunities. It's very, very exciting, I think.
We do. Well, we're just getting at the end of our time, and I see your note, Don, that if anyone has a question or a comment you'd like to ask David, you have him now. Just like he said, he's in the seat. He can't get out until I let him. So this is your chance if you would like to unmute yourself.
Excuse me, I see Mary Camp out there. Hi, Mary.
There she is, yeah. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and jump in. I'm listening.
I just wanted to say hi, Mary.
Hi, David. I am so glad to see you, and I loved everything you said. It was wonderful. It was good. I liked your talking about your journey, how you discovered sacred dance. That was wonderful.
It was. It was.
Great to see you.
Any other question out there, Romulo? I'm trying to look.
Yes.
Mary Lee.
Yeah, this is Mary Lee. Hello, thank you so much for your talk. It was fascinating. I think what you said is some of the sacred movements, say of Gurdjieff, if someone does them with no explanation, they're not giving an explanation, but they still do those movements. I think what you're saying is they would still be receiving a deep feeling of the sacred. Is that accurate?
I think for some people, not everyone, of course, but I have noticed, this is why I'm very, very careful of the dancers I choose to perform with Sacred Dance Ensemble every year, because they're all professionally trained ballet dancers, because the style that I choreograph in is more contemporary ballet, and it's very complicated, difficult movement. But as we all know, classical ballet is a performing art form. So those dancers, as beautiful as they are used to, of course, projecting their personality to portray Clara in the Nutcracker or Kitri in Don Quixote or whatever. You have tremendous amount of personality you'd express. The Gurdjieff movements have no part of that. You have to completely devoid yourself of all thoughts of self and your own personality, and just find a center and just do the movement. For those, perhaps, depending on the individual and their level of consciousness, this can be, and I've seen it, a very, very powerful experience. For others, not so. It depends again on the individual. But when Gurdjieff taught these movements, he also explained that there are many, many myriads of levels to them. Yeah. And it depends again on one's consciousness, because he said some of them actually contain hidden esoteric knowledge that through your elevated consciousness and performing those movements, the individual dancer would actually absorb and understand, and not just intellectually, but to feel what he called being, having the true experience of that hidden knowledge. So again, it's a form that has all of these layers of possibilities, like a diamond. It's up to our consciousness as to how far we can explore within that diamond.
Wow. Super. Okay, anybody else have a question?
Yes, sir.
Or a comment? John West.
Hi, John.
Hi, David. It's wonderful to meet you. I was looking forward to the opportunity to do this. We have a number of things that we share together, but my question to you to talk about a little bit is your experience in attracting other men into the community of sacred movement. I had an exchange with Wendy earlier today, and just saying, we've experienced this paucity of men, at least within the guild. I know that within my own dance company, it's always a challenge. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about getting men to join you, or what you feel the challenge is for us to open this window of sacred movement to the men of Western civilization, basically.
That's a very good question. In the world of classical ballet, as you well know, it's common knowledge. It's always been very difficult to attract men. And the percentage of women to men is probably more like 20-1. Although I would say in the last 20, 25 years or so, I have seen more and more men come into the art form. When I hire my company every year to do a 5-week contract with the performances, I know that for the choreography that we are doing, for example, I have to have at least 6 men. I could have maybe 8 women, but I have to have 6 men. So fortunately here in Denver, we have a Colorado Ballet, we have a Boulder Ballet, there's some smaller companies, and dancers are always kind of looking for work. And I choose a part of the season where, like some of the bigger companies like Colorado Ballet are off contract. So I know that there is a pool of some men who are looking for work, and they come in and audition, and I've never really had a tremendous problem with that. Now, in the context of sacred dance, I know that my experience in England, when I was in the Gurdjieff group there was no issue there whatsoever.
Yeah.
That group was pretty much evenly divided between men and women. And so the men took part in all of that. I had some experiences with Gurdjieff groups here in Colorado, and it was the same thing. There were just as many men as there were women. So I'm not sure if it's really a problem on a huge global sense. It's probably much more of a localized issue in terms of the demographics. Where are you living? Where are you from?
John?
Can you hear me?
Oh, he's here. Unmute yourself,
yeah.
John. Yeah.
Oh,
So-
I was asking, where are you living?
I'm in Los Angeles, David,
Yeah.
and it's a wonderful community. We have a very broad sort of majority minority group of people. But I think that what I've discovered, whether it's on college campuses or not, is that there is always this challenge to men, whether it's in terms of the professional dance or the sacred dance, to make sure that they aren't risking or diminishing their perceived masculinity because
Right.
of dance. So, with younger men, it seems to be less of an issue.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Yay.
that's a blessing.
Yeah.
But it's getting to them and getting them sort of into the door, that makes
Yeah.
a big difference. So I do think people forget that in all of the cultures that you mentioned in your presentation, men danced. It wasn't a question, and sometimes they danced exclusively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The dervishes are a great example of that.
Yes.
Or to look at the combination of what has been described as a kind of physical bonding, a muscular bonding that we see in drill and marching and other things, even through the military. They're all extensions of the dance that go way back in terms of our antique history of humanity. But trying to cultivate that now is, for me, frustrating. And I would really love to see us be able to do a real outreach to young men and men in general for the Guild, to add their voice, not to diminish the voices of the women who have been the matriarchs of much of this movement in the Guild, but to make sure that that balance in terms of looking at inclusivity and equity would be better made.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I totally understand what you're saying. And of course, I've experienced it as well. And even today in the ballet world, I mean, let's be honest, there's still a stigma with many young men that it is not a masculine activity or career. I'll tell you a kind of a funny story. I have a friend in the ballet world named James Canfield, who was for many years the artistic director of Oregon Ballet Theater in Portland,
Mm-hmm.
Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And Portland happens to be also a one of the Nike headquarters. And so he was having the same problem, trying to get young men into his ballet school. The ballet companies have to have men. So he came up with this idea, and I love this. He got Nike to give him $250,000.
Woo.
And he went out over a period of 2 years, to all of the Afro-American inner city schools and came into the gymnasium, and he dancers dressed up in all of the real upscale Michael Jordan basketball gear.
Nike gear, of
The
course.
long shorts and the shoes, and he had hip hop music on. And all of these professional ballet dancers were dancing around the gym with this awesome, Air Jordan kind of apparel and Nike apparel on. And he got this whole thing with these young Afro-American boys that you get the shorts, the shirt, and the shoes if you come and take
Okay.
class at Oregon Valley. Oh yeah, and it worked.
Love it.
Bribery works, yes,
Oh
indeed.
yeah. Oh yeah, bribery sometimes does work. Yes, but again, as I was
In the
saying to
door.
Mary earlier, sometimes it does take a little bit of trickery to get them in the door.
Mhm.
Creative recruitment.
We have done
It is.
this consistently over the 50 years I've been in the ballet world, to try to entice young boys to come into class. What do you need? So we'll try the hip hop, we'll try the rap music and all of that stuff that they can relate to. And then, if you really like this, well, you're going to be much better at it if you take a ballet class. Now, you're not going to get every one of them to do it, but you're going to get a small percentage. So quite often it's that introduction, Jacques D'Amboise, the famous male dancer with New York City Ballet, and George Balanchine directed the New York City Theater for the Performing Arts. And I remember showing this video over and over to my dance history classes. I mean, it was so exactly what I'm just talking about. They had all of these inner city kids. It was boys and girls, but they had just as many boys. And they had the rap music, the hip hop, the cool sneakers and all of that. And then musical theater people came in and took that idea and developed it a little bit more along the lines of musical theater. So it wasn't just all rap music. Now it was more, musical theater music and everything. And they just got into it more and more and more. And then some of them went into ballet. And, so I think that's one avenue that we all probably have tried, but probably need to continue to try to entice people in a very much more non-threatening way that at first they can relate to, and then gradually they'll take the bait and go further with it.
Absolutely. Meet them where they are again. So go where they are as opposed to trying to drag them where you are.
Exactly. And this is what I've done for my entire career. We call it a course in the arts. It's a very political term, but it's what it is, community outreach. I have done 1,500 at least community outreach performances in Colorado elementary, middle, and high schools. Taking professional ballet dancers or advanced level students into these arenas. I would say 95% of these kids had never, ever seen ballet before. And to see their peers, and of course, there's always the giggles at first. Oh yeah, the boy is out there and he's partnering the girl, and oh gosh, he gets to lift her, and oh, he pushes her over her head. Oh, her skirt's going back, all of that stuff. Giggle, giggle.
That's okay.
But then they're also blown away because they're teenagers. They're first going to make fun of it, but in the back of their minds, they're seeing a boy their age, incredibly strong, like an athlete, and that's what a ballet dancer is. They're athletes. And this beautiful movement, and it's really transforming. I mean, most of these kids have never seen anything like this.
Well, the benefit for the Ailey company too, when they come at least to Los Angeles, is exactly that kind of outreach. Being able to, perform and to engage, high school and junior high school students in real time. They invite them into a concert, and then they actually move out onto the plaza here at the Music Center to engage them and have them experience it. And so many of the kids have never seen themselves reflected, nor can they see themselves mirrored unless they have that experience. I mean, it's still amazing to me that so many people have not seen the Ailey company, and even fewer in terms of looking at Arthur Mitchell and what Arthur Mitchell has done in terms of translating the kind of balletic vocabulary into more Africanized music is incredible, but it just doesn't get out there, you know, enough. So Mary and I have talked about this briefly, but you know, I think it's something that as a group of people committed to community outreach in a variety of different ways, it's something that we need to consider and to really get our arms wrapped around a kind of anti-violent, machismo image of what one has. Our strength is oftentimes in the beauty of who we are, not necessarily in the aggressiveness of who we are as men. And that lesson doesn't get out there, I think, often enough. But thank you for sharing that, and thank you for having been a wonderful example along the way. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, and I think it's the time. Here we are in this time having this conversation, and I think there is no better time. So it's taking that conversation and moving it into action that we're called now. And we're in this cool place to be able to do that. So I have one more question. If anybody has one more before we finish up today, I'm watching.
How do you spell?
Oh, Helena?
Caroline was before me. Do you want to go, Caroline?
Oh, go ahead.
It was just a remark for it's extremely, extremely inspiring to listen to you. So thank you so much for all you're bringing. Just historically, ballet was started by men, and it was part of the martial training. So those things could be brought back in a discourse to people. It was part of the equestrian and fencing and ballet. And the fact that what you said, David, that ballet as well as yoga are a spiritual tool of inner growth, as well as with the public, as people are searching for this, hopefully men, which are probably more, I think one of the things is spiritually, women get it faster than women often, but men stay on target. So women might be, they get this experience and then they kind of forget, they get lost, while men might take a tiny bit longer, but they stay on target. So those things might be things that, nowadays could be a discourse that could, be enticing men to, try it. It's like a sport. I mean, dance is a sport in a way, but it has that edge of being an inner experience and with the music, the space, the public. I mean, so I'm just super inspired. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Elena. Carolyn, I think you had a question or a comment. Yeah.
You spelled Gertrude. Am I on?
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to look up the spelling of Gertrude.
Yes. It's G as in golf, U-R-D as in dog, J-I-E-F-F.
Okay.
G-U-R-D-J-I-E-F-F.
Thank you very much. This was
Absolutely.
wonderful. I really loved it. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you to everybody, and particularly thank you to you, David, for just taking your time, your afternoon, just to be with us and to have this kind of dancing dialogue. These are so important, I think, and like I say, particularly at this time, and I'm grateful for everybody who's kind of dove in today. This has been so delightful. I'm going to put us on gallery for a minute so we can all wave goodbye. Our deepest thank you again, David, and I do have a recording, so I will send that out. So if everybody can wave their goodbyes, and thanks again so much, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Wendy.